everybody, and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DaCosta, and this is Consistent Preterism. Thank you for joining me today. We call ourselves Consistent Preterism here because we are consistently dedicated to honoring certain things like audience relevance, time statements, commonsensical statements and passages, trajectory. Man, do we honor story trajectory here at Consistent Preterism. Am I right? I mean, we look at the beginning of the story, we look at the middle of the story, we look at the end of the story, and we say, gosh, you know what? The end of the story makes no sense if not honoring the beginning of the story and the middle of the story and everything we find in between. So we're very consistent here, and people don't like that about us. In fact, I get comments all the time going back on some 500 videos on the YouTube channel, and people are just so triggered, right? So triggered. And you can tell when somebody knows something's true and they're a little bit triggered because they have this tone in their comment that just, you know, they're like butthurt about it. You know, that cognitive dissonance flare up that they're getting. They need to rub some Preparation H all over it so it flares down. Yeah, that kind of thing. So anyways, we try to remain as consistent and contextually honoring, I guess you would say, as possible here. And that's what we do. And so I hope everybody's doing well out there today. Today I want to yap about a little question. And that question is, where the heck are the 10 northern tribes? All right? Where the heck are the 10 northern tribes? All right. Now, I've done videos on this topic before. One that comes to mind, well, there's a few that come to mind, but there's one that I think I titled, God, it's been at least 2 or 3 years since I made it, something along the lines of, you know, where are the 10 northern tribes, or did the 10 northern tribes get forgotten, or something like that. But today I want to just kind of rephrase it, reword it, repack it, represent it, just so you have it again. And obviously, since 2-3 years ago when I made it, there's obviously a lot of new faces on the channel, probably a couple hundred new subscribers. So I wanted to just represent this and get you to think a little bit, like think outside the box a little here and say, wait a minute, something's not adding up. So the question is, where the heck are the 10 northern tribes? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I'm speaking specifically about the New Testament last days, right? Where the heck are the northern 10 tribes, right? Because if you know anything about Israel's history, just to give you a brief rundown, they were split. The two kingdoms were split, right? That's what we see in the Old Testament, in the old, stories. They were split. The 10 northern tribes were sort of their own kingdom. They were the kingdom of Israel. And the 2 southern tribes were the kingdom of Judah. And so you had this constant conflict, this battling back and forth, this anger, this hostility, this hatred towards each other after that split. And a lot of it, or most of it, I should say, was centered and focused on the law and the covenant and the commandments. And what was a commandment, what wasn't? Who should be allowed to do this and who shouldn't? Where do we worship God and where do we not worship God? You had Jerusalem, you had Samaria. So you have all this conflict back and forth between the 2 houses of Israel, right? And we know that the southern kingdom refer to themselves as Jews, right? We see that, I think it's in 1 Kings, is the first time that we hear of the word Jew, and they're being called Jews. So, and the northern kingdom, I should say, it was called the Israelites, or Israel, right? So you had the Jewish kingdom, and you had Israel, the northern kingdom, right? Which is also sometimes called Ephraim in the New Testament and in the Old Testament. So we have to remember the split, right, when we come to the New Testament, right? Because clearly it's still going on, right? Clearly there's still a ton of division and hatred. I mean, we see in the Gospels many instances where the Jews wouldn't even associate with their northern brethren, the Samaritans, right? They hated them. There was such hostility there. They wouldn't even, walk through. They would take the long way and walk all the way around, so they wouldn't have to deal with them. or see them or interact with them. So the hatred, the hostility, the enmity, which Paul speaks of, by the way, it was all still there, and it was all over the law, the covenant, the commandments. And the Jews were a very snooty bunch, right? They had their noses held high. They thought they were, something else. So my question is, where the heck are the 10 northern tribes when we come to the New Testament times? Because when you see the gospel and who it was actually for, right? It was only for two parties, correct? It was only for two parties. It was for Jew and Gentile, right? Jew and Gentile. Now, let's back this up. Let me think about how I can rephrase this. Let's go to the Old Testament. We know from countless prophetic texts in the Old Testament that the promise was that God was going to restore all 12 tribes, right? He was going to bring them back together. He was going to abolish the enmity. He was going to do away with the hostility and the hatred they had for one another, that being the northern and the southern kingdom, the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes. He was going to reconcile that, right? That's all throughout the prophets. One that comes to mind is the 2-stick prophecy from Ezekiel, which very clearly speaks about joining Ephraim and Judah back together into one stick. That's called reconciliation. We see the 2-branch analogy that Paul gives, which is also, 2 branches, 2 sticks. Paul is pulling from Zeke's symbolism there and telling you what's going on, but people still can't pick up on it for some reason. But the question is if all these Old Testament prophetic portions speak of the restoration of Judah and Israel, right? The 2 kingdoms. And if we know that the term Jew was given to those in Judah, right? The kingdom of Judah. Let me just tell you that the term Jew was not given to the 10 northern tribes. In fact, the 10 northern tribes hated the Jews. They were not considered Jews. They wouldn't call themselves Jews. They knew who the Jews were. We have to go by the biblical definition of the terms Jew, or the term Jew, and who that was. For instance, guys like Professor Jason Staples, whom I chewed to shreds on a rebuttal that I put out. This was a guy that Derek Lambert used and abused over at Myth Vision for a couple episodes to put some dinner on his table, and then he kicked him to the curb. I haven't seen him or heard of him in months over there, maybe years. But anyways, Professor Jason Staples makes the argument that all 12 tribes were called Jews in the 1st century. I believe it's him that makes that argument, and there's others. I could be wrong about him, but I'm pretty sure. But yeah, they make the case that we should look at all 12 tribes as Jews in the 1st century, which is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense, because we see the very conflict in the 1st century in the New Testament writings of the Jews versus their northern brethren. We see that hatred and that hostility that's still there. So do you really think that it's wise to call all 12 tribes Jews? No, it's not. Now, I'll admit, many people do. In fact, many comments on my channel are from bozos who clearly don't know the difference between Jew and Israel, or Jew and Israelite. They don't have any clue about how the 2-house stuff works, right? And what they would call themselves, and the division and the split and the trajectory. They miss every single point in that regard. And they come and comment and say, God wasn't just saving Jews. Right, exactly, bozo. God was not just saving Jews. He was saving 2 parties. He was saving Jews and Gentiles, right? So now, if I'm correct, and we should understand the term Jew exclusively to refer to the 2 southern houses, to the 2 southern tribes of Israel, Judah and Benjamin, and of course we know some of the Levites were there. But if I'm correct, and I'm holding that definition true to its original form that we find in the Bible, then who are the Gentiles? Or I should say, where the heck are the northern 10 tribes of Israel? Where are they in this gospel salvation mission? Right? Because again, remember, this is the key to remember here. We are only looking at 2 parties in focus that are being saved. 2 batches of elect individuals that are being gathered in. One batch is the Jews, the other batch is the Gentiles. Paul said, when the fullness of the Gentiles come in, all Israel would be saved, right? So, who are these Gentiles? And where the heck are the 10 northern tribes of Israel? Because we have all the promises, right? We have the prophetic promises. all those promises are laid out for us in the Old Testament nice and clearly. We know that that was basically what was predicted to happen, right? God was going to reconcile and restore the 12 tribes. He was going to bring Ephraim and Judah back together as the two sticks. Jeremiah talked about the return to Zion, Second Temple period, and spoke of the two houses coming back together and the law again being written on their hearts and minds, right? This is over and over again. Isaiah, come on, the new covenant in Isaiah, the new heaven, new earth, that's the two houses. That's them being all joined together and, celebrating in the streets again and, worshiping God properly again. I mean, this is all restoration, reconciliation promises. So when we come to the New Testament and we see these two groups in focus, we only see the Jews, right? We don't see the northern 10 tribes. Or do we? Or do we, and we just aren't picking up on it? Or do we, and we just aren't familiar enough with the trajectory, with the story's trajectory? We're not familiar with what happened to the 10 northern tribes. We're not familiar with what Josephus said happened with the 10 northern tribes. We're not even familiar with the fact that in the New Testament, the authors of the New Testament clearly state time and time again that the 10 tribes were in existence. They clearly make repeated mentionings of the whole 12 tribes. I mean, think about this, right? Jesus, in the Gospels, said in the age to come, the 12 apostles will sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. That's the total 12 tribes. James, in the New Testament, when writing his letter to these saints, wrote to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Greetings, my brethren, said James. Right? Revelation, we see that the 12 gates had, the 12 names of the 12 tribes. We see that there was 12,000 sealed from each of the 12 tribes. Hebrews, the author of Hebrews, when talking about this salvation work that God was doing with Israel, makes mention of the two houses of Israel, both Israel and Judah being joined together. Now, of course, he's sort of doing a flashback to Jeremiah's days when there was the Second Temple return to Zion period, but he's using that to sort of explain what was going on in his day as well. It was a sort of a redoing of that, that picture or that scene. So we have to pick up on this, folks. All 12 tribes were in view in the New Testament letters. But many times we only see two groups being mentioned. We see Jew and Gentile. So where the heck are the 10 northern tribes? Well, folks, they are the Gentiles. Okay, they are the Gentiles. Look at what Josephus says. Writing in the 1st century, he says this, quote, "The entire body of the people of Israel remained in that country," he's speaking of Media, "wherefore there are but 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, in Asia and Europe, subject to the Romans, while the 10 tribes are beyond the Euphrates until now, and are an immense number, or an immense multitude," he says, "and not to be estimated by numbers." That's in Antiquities of the Jews, book 11, blah, blah, blah. So look at how powerful that is. Here you have a 1st century historian, one of the most quoted and relied upon historians for that entire time frame, Josephus, that is. And Josephus says the entire body of the people of Israel remained in Media. Wherefore, or where there are but 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, that's the house of Judah, in Asia and Europe, subject to the Romans, while the 10 northern tribes are beyond the Euphrates until now, meaning until his day in the 1st century, and he says they are an immense multitude not to be estimated by numbers. Now, it's amazing, isn't it, that the book of Revelation actually refers to the great multitude in that same exact way. It calls them an immense number not to be estimated, or a great multitude from the nations, right? Well, here's Josephus calling the 10 northern tribes that very thing, an immense number not to be estimated, an immense multitude. That's just incredible, right? So do we really think that the great multitude from all the nations in Revelation is anybody other than the 10 northern tribes? No, not at all. Okay? And so again, this just proves my theory that Josephus even knew that there were the Jews, that being Judah and Benjamin, and there were the 10 northern tribes existing in the first century, and they were scattered all about beyond the Euphrates until now, said he. Okay? So, again, where the heck are the 10 northern tribes in the first century? Very simply, very clearly, they are the Gentiles who are being saved. They are the Gentiles who God is having mercy on. They are the Gentiles who are having the Spirit poured out upon them in those last days as a deposit of their inheritance until the purchased possession, or until they received their inheritance, the purchased possession. So that's who the Gentiles are. They're the 10 northern tribes. We don't need to complicate this. We don't need to think too hard on it. We don't need to try to find, oh, God, they weren't really here. History doesn't confirm that they were really beyond the Euphrates. They were actually to the west. Give me a break, dude. Give me a flipping break. That's just Joe Desperado type stuff. Okay? Josephus himself knew that the 2 tribes were in one place and the 10 tribes were scattered far abroad in other places. And so it makes no sense for Paul to speak of the Jews in the first century. Of course, Paul would know the difference. Of course, Paul would be very familiar with all the promises of the prophets. Of course, Paul would know the enmity that existed between the 2 houses over the law, because he spoke of it in places like Ephesians, Galatians. Of course, Paul knows all about that, right? Paul's not going to make the same error that people do today and miss that. No. But Paul understands that he's dealing with 2 very different classes of people. He's dealing with Jews who are snooty, pride-filled, look down upon everybody type of people, right? Oh, we have Abraham as our father. They're full of pride, right? He's dealing with that. He's trying to sort of break that down. He's trying to sort of, break down that middle wall of separation, that being the enmity that was the law, he said. He said Christ died and nailed the handwritten requirements of that law to the cross for them. He abolished the commandments and ordinances in his flesh, he said. So Paul understands what he's doing. And he understands that a Jew, when he's speaking to Jews, he would never refer to a paganized Israelite as a Jew. He would refer to them, or they would refer to them, as Gentiles, because that's what they thought they were. The Jews looked at their brethren, their counterparts, as dogs. They looked at them as Gentiles. They looked at them as unclean. That's what the whole parable of the prodigal son is, folks. It's the brother that stayed home with the law, that being the Jews. And it's the brother that wandered and went out and rolled in, muck and filth and dirt with the pigs. That's the northern kingdom Israelites, aka the Gentiles. And the prodigal son parable shows a very nice ending where that son returns to Papa Goad. Shout out to Matthew Simon. That son, that prodigal, that lost sheep, that 10 northern tribes, returns to Papa Goad and finds restoration, finds healing, finds love, finds mercy, finds forgiveness. And that's exactly what we see taking place in the New Testament. We see that peace was preached to those who were near, that being the Jews, and it was also preached to those who were afar off, that being the Gentiles, aka the northern tribes of Israel. So folks, I ask one last time before I close this out, where the heck are the 10 northern tribes of Israel? Because remember, you cannot have a salvation mission. You cannot have the promises of the prophets fulfilled. Remember, Jesus in Luke said, when you see the armies encompass Jerusalem in this generation, know that all things written will be fulfilled. All the prophetic texts, all the promises, everything that was told and spoken of by our forefathers, by your forefathers, you know that when you see that army, those armies surround Jerusalem to lay it waste in these last days, know that everything written will be fulfilled at this time. Okay? And so you cannot have that fulfillment of all things written. You cannot have the completion of the promises of the hope of the restoration of the 12 tribes of Israel without the 10 northern tribes being gathered in alongside their Jewish brethren. You just can't have it. And since we only have two parties in focus in the salvation, in the New Testament, in the gospel, in the mission, Jew and Gentile, then folks, I ask you, who are the Gentiles of the New Testament last days? Well, I think you know. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you really, really enjoyed it. Give it a like, a Rooski. It really helps the channel. Leave a comment. Tell me to F off. Do whatever you'd like. I hope you guys have a great day, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.